Back in 1986, a totally routine safety test somehow became the worst nuclear disaster in history. Now, this isn't just a story about nuclear physics. It's a critical case study in leadership, in culture, and in systems failure. And if you work in any kind of high-stakes environment, from an operating room to a hospital administration office, the lessons from Chernobyl are, believe me, more relevant today than ever.
Okay, let's dive in.
It all starts with this: a frantic phone call in the middle of the night. This is the exact moment a catastrophic failure begins to unfold, a moment that would literally change the world. And it all began with a test that was supposed to make the plant safer. So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at what actually happened that night. Then we're going to peel back the layers to really understand the deep systemic problems that made it all possible. We'll get into the devastating cost, and most importantly, we're going to pull out the crucial lessons in disaster management that every single leader needs to understand. So how does a safety test, of all things, trigger a nuclear meltdown? I mean, it sounds impossible, right? To get it, we have to go back to the hours right before the explosion. Okay, so the test was designed to see if the plant's turbines could power the cooling pumps during a blackout. Simple enough. Preparations start on the afternoon of April 25th, but then the test gets delayed. This meant the day shift, the crew who had actually prepared for this thing, they went home, and the less experienced night shift inherited a reactor that was already being prepped for a really complex and unusual procedure. Then, in just 1 minute, literally 60 seconds between 1:23 and 1:24 a.m., their actions led to total catastrophe. Here's the sequence of events, and it's just wild. To even run the test, the operators had to disable key automatic safety systems, which was a huge violation of protocol. This, along with some other moves, put the reactor into an extremely unstable low-power state. So when they finally realized something was wrong, they did what you'd expect. They hit the big red emergency shutdown button. But here's the fatal twist. Because of a hidden design flaw, that final safety measure did the exact opposite of what it was supposed to do. It created a massive power surge that just blew the reactor apart. You know, it's so easy to just blame the operators, and for a long time, that was the official story. But what really happened at Chernobyl wasn't just one mistake. It was a complete system failure where every single layer of defense failed all at once. Let's start peeling back those layers. At the very heart of the disaster was a secret the operators didn't even know. The RBMK reactor had a fatal design flaw. See, in most reactors, if you lose your cooling water, the reaction slows down. It's a built-in safety feature. But in this design, under certain conditions, losing coolant actually sped up the reaction, creating this terrifying runaway feedback loop. The operators were basically driving a car without knowing that slamming on the brakes could sometimes act like flooring the accelerator. And this just perfectly illustrates the culture that allowed that flaw to stay secret. Publicly, the Soviet Union was telling everyone its plants were perfectly safe. But behind closed doors, as declassified documents later showed, the KGB knew about major problems, including a partial meltdown in another Chernobyl reactor just 4 years earlier. This was a culture where bad news got buried, not addressed.
So you end up with this perfect storm. You have a poor safety culture, where operators were never even told about the reactor's true dangers, a total lack of transparency that hid previous accidents, a command structure that, even after the explosion, prioritized secrecy over safety, delaying the evacuation of the nearby city of Pripyat for a critical 36 hours. And finally, inadequate training for the specific crew who was running this dangerous, non-routine test.
The result of this cascade of failures was a catastrophe on a scale that's, well, it's almost unimaginable. The numbers really help tell the story of the devastation. Within just a few months, 31 people were dead. These were the first responders, the plant workers and firefighters who ran towards the disaster, completely unaware of the invisible poison they were absorbing. 28 of them died from acute radiation syndrome. The human disruption was just immense. In the days and years that followed, 350,000 people were forced from their homes, leaving behind entire cities like Pripyat, which are still ghost towns today. They were told they were leaving for 3 days. They never came back. For 10 days, the reactor burned, just spewing radiation into the atmosphere. And while it was only 5% of the core that was released, the wind carried this radioactive cloud across Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, and much of Europe, contaminating millions of acres of land.
The long-term health consequences are still debated, but one impact is absolutely clear. International scientific bodies attribute around 5,000 cases of thyroid cancer to the disaster, mostly in people who were children at the time and were exposed to radioactive iodine. And we have to talk about the liquidators. Over 500,000 people, we're talking soldiers, miners, engineers, volunteers, were sent in to contain the disaster. They worked in unbelievably dangerous conditions, and many received huge doses of radiation. Their sacrifice is what prevented an even worse catastrophe. Okay, so that's the story. But for us, the real work begins now. What can we learn from all this? How can we prevent a similar systems failure in our own organizations? To really understand how this could happen, we can use a framework you might have heard of called the Swiss cheese model. Think of each slice of cheese as a layer of defense: safety protocols, staff training, equipment design, communication. Now, every slice has holes, small, latent flaws. On a normal day, the holes don't line up. But at Chernobyl, the holes in every single slice, the design flaw, the disabled systems, the poor training, the culture of secrecy, they all aligned perfectly, allowing the disaster to slice right through. So the big question is, how do we prevent the holes from aligning? Well, first, you have to build a robust safety culture where raising a concern is rewarded, not punished. Second, demand transparency. Hiding near misses or small errors, like the Soviets did, is a recipe for disaster. Third, you have to empower your frontline teams. The Chernobyl operators lacked the full information and training they needed. Your teams must have everything they need to make the right call under pressure. And finally, plan for compound failures. Don't just plan for one thing to go wrong, plan for 5 things to go wrong all at once. Now, I know what you might be thinking. This is just a history lesson. But the principles we've just talked about, they are directly applicable to the complex systems all of us work in today. Think about a hospital. You've got advanced technology, brilliant doctors, complex procedures. But a communication breakdown between shifts, a misread patient chart, a piece of equipment with a known but unaddressed flaw, these are Chernobyl-level risks. The technology is absolutely useless without a culture of safety, clear protocols, and transparent leadership to support it. So this is the question I want you to take back to your teams. Where are your vulnerabilities? Is there a process everyone quietly works around because it's broken? Is there a reluctance to report errors for fear of blame? Identifying those small, hidden holes is the single most important thing you can do to prevent a large-scale failure. Ultimately, the legacy of Chernobyl is this powerful, sobering reminder. Catastrophes are almost never born from a single dramatic event. They are the inevitable result of a flawed system, poor decisions, and a broken culture. And understanding that is the first and most critical step in making sure a disaster like this never, ever happens again.